States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For it to us the things we think, say, and do.
Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Did Rick Martin slip in without me noticing? No, Rick Martin. Is anyone prepared to do the birthdays and anniversaries in his absence?
I can go birthday.
We'll save that one. So nobody got any older. We'll just keep it at that. That's the story, and I'm sticking with it. Well, let's introduce the guests. David, will you introduce our guests, please?
Absolutely. Good morning. We have 52 members in attendance this morning. We have 2 visiting Rotarians. We have Claudia Benedict from Summit Rotary.
Let's welcome Claudia.
We have Carl Ashby from Greensboro. And we have 2 guests. Mike, would you like to introduce your guests?
Yeah, my bride Marianne is with me today, so.
And Jeff Tillman as a guest.
Stephanie Chandler, stand up, Stephanie.
Good morning.
Hello, everybody.
I'm Stephanie Chandler with Wellspring Solutions. You may know us as ACE, Adult Center for Enrichment. And I've heard a lot of great things about your group, so I'm glad to be here. Thanks.
Welcome.
Claudia, it's really nice to have you. Appreciate you being here this morning. It's always nice when you have the district governor attend. And this is something special. We have the current district governor, a past district governor, and a future district governor. One Matthew, let's run through some announcements real quick. We have a full agenda. Matthew, do you want to say a couple things about the bell ringing?
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I know it's nice and cold outside, but hopefully we'll get some good weather in a few days. But the 10th is when we start ringing the bell at the Franklin Center. I don't know, it's a little confusing where we're going to be, but we're going to be at Belk facing Harper's Restaurant. And I'm not quite sure how the whole wind and everything works in that little corridor, but you might want to bundle up. I think it's going to be pretty cold and windy. We are at about, now I'm not complaining yet, but we're about 50% signed up. We've got a lot of slots that have 2 available positions. I would greatly appreciate it if we'd start focusing on those and then fill in after that. That'd be wonderful. But again, we're doing good, and I'll be happy to send out the link again this afternoon. And I'll probably start hammering it even harder next week. But let's fill it up and get it done. It's a great thing.
Please do. I did not, for some reason, I don't know if my spam filter kicked it out, but I did not even see the link. So I'm glad to hear that's already gone out.
Well, that's what everybody says.
So Matthew, just to be clear, you want
I'll send it out, don't worry.
just to be clear, you want the empty slot filled first, then we'll go back in and double up.
Yes, that'd be great. I mean, it's not a requirement, but it would be helpful.
Good deal.
Well, one thing that I know we've enjoyed doing, and we do such a good job of over the years, is ringing in pairs, especially if it's cold or there's not much traffic coming and going. It's nice to have some company. It's a great time to get to know another Rotarian. So I would really encourage you also to go ahead and fill up the open slots and look for somebody to join up with to ring the bell with. Matthew, I want to thank you also for your participation in the Designs to Fight Hunger. Did you all see the email that Matthew sent out the picture? And Frank Jenkins was the architect for the giant cake. It's pretty clever. It's huge. Thank you for the designs, and thank you for the food contributions and the staff. That's huge. Tony, let's talk about the holiday party that's coming up.
Howdy, everybody. So yeah, we've got some holiday festivities coming up, of course, in the month of December. Next week on Thursday evening. For those of you that did not get the Sign Up Genius, please let me know so I can be sure to get it forwarded to you. We'll be having our yearly holiday party over at Mike Conrad's house. And so it's going to be a fun time. One piece of data I apparently did not include in the email. I'll include, of course, in the resend is it's $35 per person. For that, we will have some wine provided and possibly some beer as well. But bring if you have a favorite libation, bring something with you as well. And then on December the 20th, and as a reminder, that takes place of next week's meeting. So it's a great time for makeup or just having the actual meeting itself. Secondly, on December the 20th, we have the Santa breakfast, which is going to be right here in the Caldwell room. We get to open up the wall and have a lot of fun with kids. Be sure to bring a toy for Toys for Tots that morning, but that's a really important part of that there as well. And I'll have the sign-up genius sent out for that by tomorrow afternoon.
Thanks, Tony. And Toys for Tots is a tradition we started like several years ago, maybe many years ago, but it's the emphasis on for children and us to have that thought of giving. In the old days, we used to hand out gifts for the kids that came, but that got a little bit, as the club grew and the numbers got unwieldy. I think that's when the consideration came up. Why don't we think about giving to others? And that's the thrust behind the Toys for Tots campaign. I don't see Justin here this morning. I'd love to put in a plug for the Santa's Pickers for the holiday, the Santa breakfast. So if you are a guitar player, banjo player, any kind of musician, reach out to Justin. He's organizing that. Are there any other announcements for the good of the group? Okay. In the interest of time, we are going to skip a lightning round of feud today. I know that's going to break everybody's heart. No feud today. Chris, sorry about that. We will move right into the football pool. We'll catch up next time.
Okay, I'll be very quick. There are sheets on your table. There's a couple extras if, I've got a couple extras if you don't have them. I know you all have your, and it's maybe an overused phrase, the bucket list, but you all have your bucket list, and I know that playing the Gate City football pool is on everyone's bucket list. This week is the last week to fulfill that this year, okay? So you want to fill out your forms. This is it. So you don't want to miss that opportunity. Last week there was a lot of competition on the high end. Really good performances overall. On the folks who didn't do quite well, there wasn't as much competition. And I don't know, it was kind of a bad sign. I mentioned before how Lisa Simpson is really good about putting smiley faces on there, which brightens, my time filling these, or scoring these. But there was no happy face on there this week, and I understand why. So unfortunately, the low scorer, who gets a wonderful Tanger pen though, to work on that, is Lisa.
You're doing it on purpose.
Now on the high end, we had a lot of folks at 17. Really impressive. We had Walt. David Lillard, Mike Bowers, Judy Brumley, and several at 16. A couple really kind of stood out a little bit. The high was 19. We had a couple at 18. One of them was my cohort in football pool crime, Dennis Marquette. But at 18, also in second place is Chris Neal, and is with 18 is Dale Harrell here today? Okay, Dale was the winner at 19. So we got prizes. Dale gets to pick two good prizes, and then Chris can have the other. It's a Tanger Outlet coffee mug or a Carl Meyer baseball cap. Okay. So you can pick which one. All right. So everybody's the winner with a wonderful Tanger coffee mug. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mike. How about some happy dollars?
How about some happy dollars? That's what I'm talking about. All right. Matt?
Probably the bacon in my mouth. I've got three people I want to thank for little Chuck's birthday party last week. We had a fire theme, and 6 months ago, the fire department decided they were going to quit driving by houses after I'd already told her, no problem, I know a captain, it's cool. So luckily, Rusty Hoffman came through and brought a 1952 Ford fire truck, which was the first fire engine in Summerfield. That his dad had restored, and it was amazing. Took us for a ride, and most of the $100 for him. I want to thank Guy Rabondo and Bob Haybrock for providing me with some space heaters that helped out, and I promise God I'll get this back to you soon.
Just one dot. You'll appreciate that. Had a great day this weekend. I was down near Morehead City fishing. I don't know if it was my best day ever, but it was certainly in the top. Matthew, I apologize for my license. Got 20 speckled trout in about 2 hours.
Holy cow.
I'm sorry, 30 speckled trout in about 2 hours, and then that evening I went flounder. It was 35 all day, it was 30 at night. And then that evening I went flounder gigging, which I've talked to some of you all about. I love it. Got 10 flounder in about 2 hours. Wow. Which I think I was a teenager.
30 flounders in a half an hour.
No.
You realize the limit on trout is 4, right?
Well, I only kept 4.
I know.
Taking them 4 at a time.
It's also all right, mine's 5.
The first thing, before I do my happy dollar, yesterday was Buster's birthday. He's a charter member, and I think we need to sing happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Buster. Happy birthday to you. Now my happy dollar, boy, what? Well, that was happy. But last Friday, Marianne and I were blessed with our 3rd grandchild, Jessa Brooke Conrad. And Jessa had her own mindset. She didn't want to be born in a hospital. So before 911 could get to our, or they dialed 911, and before the EMTs and the fire department from Hornytown could get to their home, my son delivered the baby. And the baby is very healthy, 7 pounds, 13 ounces.
How's your son?
He is fine. I always thought, being an Eagle Scout, he had this sense about him, knowing what to do. So everything turned out really wonderful.
I was an Eagle Scout, and I couldn't.
Okay, well, I bragged about the ballerina from Greenville long enough. She's been in Nutcracker 5 years, but this year she did something really special. She traded in her ballet shoes and bought a pair of spikes and is running cross country and ran in her first cross country event down at McAlpine Park Saturday after Thanksgiving in the rain and the wind and in about 6 inches of rain and mud. So I am so proud of her. She has a heart like a giant. Wow. So there you go, my 12-year-old Avery.
Someone else who has a heart like a giant, and I'd like to everybody keep in mind this week, Lieutenant Molly Hassel, the United States Air Force, deployed this week to Point Sen. She did call last night from a secure, undisclosed location. She's well on her way in service to all of us.
Wow.
All right.
One more. All right. Go ahead.
November 17th, we were in Apex celebrating our grandbaby's first birthday, Sadie Grace, so it was a fun day for all.
It's got to be quick.
It is.
Okay, go ahead. I mean, when people hold money up, it's just.
You're like beat a hunt.
Yeah.
Now, my daughter, who serves in the Navy Nurse Corps, will be home for Christmas for the first time in 3 years. She's coming in on the 15th.
So Grandpappy always used to tell me, if you love someone, let them go. If they come back, it means nobody else wanted them. Let them go again.
This is a very special morning. Thank you, Buster. This is a very special morning as we induct 2 new members. Judge Hassel, will you come up and conduct our induction ceremony?
Glad to, Mr. President, and at this time I would invite our new inductees and their sponsors to come forward.
Is that special?
At this time also, I would briefly ask our sponsors, Governor Conrad and Ms. Brumley, to tell the gathering here about our newest members.
Well, I am really pleased that our newest member would be Frank Cheney. And, you know, when I met Frank, I said, Frank, you need to be a Rotarian. And it's taken me a little while, but he has come through. But he is going to be a terrific member. I think you probably read his bio. He graduated from Notre Dame, and he went to school at Yale. He's an architect. He's got 2 grown children. And I know that he and Claudia love to travel, and they love to do all things Rotary. So, and I will tell you this about Frank. Whenever I mentioned to him about the Gate City Club, I said, you know, the camaraderie in this club is just over the top. And he said, you know, I love it, but the reason I'm joining is the service aspect of Rotary. So we're so happy that Frank is going to be a new member of our club.
Likewise.
Judy.
I'm so excited that Christy Milholland's joining us from Out of the Garden Project. Christy and her husband work together in their nonprofit, and we all know about Out of the Garden Project, and we look forward to supporting them in the next many years to come. Christy has 4 children, 2 girls and 2 stepsons, so we're excited to have her. Thank you.
Gate City Rotary Club was founded in 1991 with an eye towards service through all the avenues and opportunities that we're given, as well as the fellowship and embodiment of the 4-way test, which we are expected to pursue and abide by. And Frank and Christy, it is indeed our pleasure this morning to welcome you as the latest members to the Gate City Rotary Club on behalf of our board of directors and our fellow members. And our welcome is not only in anticipation of the good fellowship we'll share with you here on Thursday mornings and during social outings. We welcome you also for the strong arms and sturdy back, which will help us carry out our many service projects, which in a small yet significant way make our community, our country, and our world a better place for all to live. Now, for all here, Rotarian and non-Rotarian alike, I believe we have some visitors here. Let's be reminded of these important facts. First, Rotary is not a political organization, but all Rotarians are vitally concerned with everything pertaining to good citizenship and the election of good men and women to public office. Secondly, Rotary is not a charitable organization, yet its activities exemplify the charity and the sacrifices that one should expect from people who believe that we have a responsibility to help others. And third, Rotary is not a religious organization, but it is built on those eternal principles that have served as the moral compass for people throughout the ages, as well as the foundation of our great country. Well, Rotary is an organization of business and professional people pledged to upholding the highest professional standards. Rotarians believe that worldwide fellowship and international peace can be achieved when business people unite under the banner of service. Now, with that in mind, at this time I would like to ask everyone present to please stand for the delivery of the following charge. Frank, Christy, you have been chosen for membership of the Rotary Club of Gate City. Your sponsor and fellow members believe you to be a leader in your special line of work, and that you embody the qualities of head and heart that fit you to interpret and impart the message of Rotary. You are the representative of your vocation for this club, and at the same time you now become an ambassador of Rotary. We rely upon you to carry the principles and ideals of service to those with whom you work. Additionally, we expect you to help inspire us, your fellow members, to become better Rotarians. And now I would ask your fellow sponsors, or in the case of our Prime Governor here, to pin and present you with the distinguishing lapel of Rotarian membership, which I believe our Secretary, Steve, has for your presentation and application.
And I would like to make a special announcement, and that is the fact that I have here 2 truly Rotary International pins. These pins cannot be had here in this country. These pins ones have been in 4 countries, truly are Rotary International. And so Christy, if it's all right, I would like to pin you. Wait, let's see if I'm gonna do this with the turban on. Yeah, so this is, and you will not see this pin frequently because it is truly Rotary International. In fact, I don't even wear mine, sweetie, but you get to wear yours. In fact, Frank has been to 3 of the countries where these pins have traveled, although they do come from 4. So thank you very much and welcome to Rotary.
Thank you. It is indeed an honor to have our district governor with us for that very special presentation. It's an honor for all of us at this time, Frank, Christy, to welcome you, and I would ask you to do so at this time for our newest members of the Gate City Rotary Club. Thank you so much. Mr. President.
Good morning, Gate City Rotary. Good morning, Gate City Rotary.
Good morning.
How many of you could say that you and Alzheimer's dementia are on a first-name basis? Wow. I keep asking that question, and I look forward to, with all my might, to the day when no hands go up. Our speaker this morning is Jeff Williamson, MD, MHS, from Wake Forest. In the interest of time, that's all the introduction he needs, and that's all the introduction I'm going to give him. So please give him, Jeff, a warm Gate City Rotary welcome.
Thank you for that introduction. That's the best one I've ever had. Chris is going to help me go through some slides with you all, but first I just want to say thank you for having me over. I live on the other side of Winston in Advance, so you can tell I live there because I know how to say it. But it's a real joy and privilege for me to be here. And really what I want to do is just quickly do 2 things. One, talk to you a little bit about the Civic Center on Aging, which is really, there's only about 4 freestanding aging centers in the country. Most people don't know that we have one in our own area here. Most medical centers have heart centers and cancer centers, but the fastest growing population in the nation are older people. And you may have seen yesterday that for the first time in history we have actually more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 65 in the country. So there's a lot of opportunities, I like to say, in this area. So I want to talk to you about how Wake Forest, but also our community is doing really what the title says here, is trying to improve the health and independence of an aging society. So I'll talk a little bit about the principles behind that, and then I'm going to give you one illustration, some recent results, and that were led by Wake Forest on a national scale to determine what's the best blood pressure to prevent some of the very things that cause people to lose their independence, move out of their home, and move into assisted living to a nursing home. So, Chris, I'll go to the next slide. This is just a slide that illustrates what I just told you. So the arrows there are, this is not surprising, but I'm a geriatrician, by the way, so I specialize in older people, the opposite of a pediatrician. There are actually about 30 to 40,000 geriatricians short in the country right now. Very few medical students choose geriatrics, and we can talk about that later at the end. So in fact, Wake Forest has probably one of the largest groups of geriatricians in the nation. We have 15 geriatricians. And we have about 50 faculty, so about half are geriatrician and half are gerontologists, which are not physicians but study aging. Anyway, this slide here, the yellow bar just shows you what's going to happen to the population over the age of 85 in the next few decades, and the top bluish bar looks at that group that's 75 to 84. So we see we have a rapidly rising group of individuals. We're just on the cusp of that right now. The next slide is a line that will just go right through Chris and go right to the next one. So really, what are the goals of our care and our aging research? What are we doing at Wake Forest in the Stick Center on Aging, Successful Aging and Alzheimer's Prevention? And I always like to talk to our medical students that what we're doing are looking at the two main reasons why an older adult ends up going to a nursing home. It's either physical disability, loss of the ability to walk, or cognitive disability, loss of the ability to think. If you walk around, when I walk around in a nursing center with students, every person in that bed, and most of them are women, about 2 out of every 3 are women, they're there because either they cannot remember what to do or who their family is often, or they can't actually get up out of bed and go to the restroom. Those are the 2 reasons. And so there's a pathway that people go down that leads to that. And we can talk about why more women than men. I'll just say that men tend to die off more quickly. We're weaker creatures. Women tend to live longer, but in a more disabled state. So we can talk about that later. Next slide. So it shows really a reframing of what I'm talking about here. What our goal when we're thinking about care for older people, but when we're thinking about the research, is to try to bring together those 2 lines, the orange line and the blue line. So I would like, the ideal patient for me is someone in their 90s who yesterday was with their family or, maybe whatever, making out with their honey, and then next thing you know, they didn't wake up that morning. And that's the ideal case for us. So my goal for most of my patients is not that they continue to live, but that they live in an active state until just a few weeks or days or hours before they become disabled. So right now, we have a fairly large segment of the population that becomes disabled, and they live in that disabled state for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, sometimes a decade. So we're trying to compress those 2 lines. The next slide shows really an illustration of how we implement this. This is the sort of an idealized curve of function for people as we age. Time is on the bottom, and function is on the left-hand side. And so most of us in this room, I think all of us, are at the high end of that curve. Down the far right are people who are very disabled. They can't do the 5 things you have to do to stay out of a nursing home. And that is, bathe. It's really the 5 things I always tell the students that you do after you turn your alarm clock off for the last time in the morning. You get up out of bed. Almost everyone goes to the restroom immediately. They shower or bathe, and then they dress, and then they prepare a meal. Or they eat a meal. They don't even have to prepare it, like this morning. So those 5 things, really, you have to be able to do those, or you can't, or either have someone with you in your home 24/7, or else you end up having to go to a nursing home where someone does that for you. Assisted living facilities are mainly cognitive disability. There are 7 things that really determine whether someone should go to is qualified to be in an assisted living facility. And then there's this area in the big circle that is where a lot of our work happens. So we have, over the past 2 decades, sorry, I keep moving this away and I keep hearing myself. We have, over the past 2 decades, developed some measures to identify people in that circle. These are people who, within the next 5 years, are more likely to end up in the 2 smaller circles. And then we test, and so these are people who have difficulty walking 2 or 3 city blocks, or carrying groceries from their car to their home, or have started to fall. Maybe had 1 or 2 falls in the past couple of years that are unexplained falls, so to speak. And the other thing that we know in this circle, people's walking speed begins to decline. Walking speed is actually the most important vital sign for older people. A normal walking speed predicts where you will be in 5 years. It's both cognitively and functionally. And I don't have the data to show you that today, but regardless of what age a person is, 2 people that walk the same rate at 90 and 65 will have the same probability of ending up in a nursing home. So in that large circle, we're testing interventions like exercise. What's the best diet for people who are over this? What's the best blood pressure to prevent people from going down the curve? Next slide is really what I'm going to talk about today, is one area of our work, and that is what have we learned about blood pressure control and flattening out that curve so that it looks more like the curve that I showed you on the previous page. Next slide. And this is just to tell you, I'm transitioning to this illustration about blood pressure. So for years, you could go to a physician in different parts of the world and get a blood pressure recommendation that fit any of these first 5 categories. And all of them would say, well, there's some evidence, circumstantial or otherwise, that might tell me that you need to be less than 120, less than 130, 140, 150, 160. Currently in Europe, the guidelines are less than 160. In the United States, as of last November, the guidelines are less than 130. But some medical societies still say that the best blood pressure is less than 140. Now, when I went to medical school, the best blood pressure guideline for someone was 100 plus your age. That's what I was taught in my medical school class. So that's been a few years ago now, and longer than this Rotary Club was founded. I just but the science of blood pressure control is changing. This is the top number. Really, the top number is the most important number for the systolic blood pressure is the most important number. So I want to now go through with you on the next slide, beginning some research that gives us some idea of more and more what the best number is that will help prevent some of those disabilities that I just talked about. This is actually a very famous study that's still going on, the National Health and Nutrition Education Study, that basically looks at men and women, surveys them every year, calls them into a large trailer. We have large numbers of older people who participate in this, and younger people. And so this is just a representative sample of who has hypertension. And you see the older you get, the more likely you are to have a blood pressure. You see a person over 75, 79% of women and 85% of men have high blood pressure. Okay? Only about half of those individuals are treated right now. Next slide. And the next slide. Now, what this shows are the reasons that people were hospitalized, the top 6 reasons why people were hospitalized in the year that they became disabled and had to go to a nursing home or an assisted living facility. And you can see the 6 diagnoses, but 3 of the 6 are actually complications of high blood pressure. Stroke, heart failure, and coronary heart disease, having a heart attack, etc. And so you could add those 3 together and say, really, probably the most common reason that people end up disabled and going to a nursing home is from cardiovascular disease. This data is actually 20 years old. We're redoing the data now, and the thing that has displaced one of these is dementia, not surprisingly, as Jonathan mentioned. So dementia, and we can talk about that later, is now one of the top 6 reasons. And I'm going to show you in a moment why dementia is related to blood pressure as well. Next slide. So here is the question. Does intensive blood pressure control reduce the risk of these complications, which are often the complications that lead to someone moving out of their home? And how generalizable, how much of the population does this apply to? Next slide. So I'm really just cutting to the chase. I only have 5 more slides. But the here is a study that was released about 2 years ago. Wake Forest led this study, looking first of all at, on the left-hand side, can you reduce the occurrence of stroke, heart failure, and heart attack and death in people over the age of 75 if you have their blood pressure treated to 120 in the red versus 140 in the blue. And so you can see that the people who actually had their blood pressure treated to a goal of 120 had about a 30% reduction in these very events that caused people to leave their home. This is death on the right. Very rarely in medical research do you find something that changes death and changes particular diseases. So this is one of the few times that's actually been shown in history. So even death, you see, when you see that you had to treat 41 people for 3 years, just over 3 years, to prevent one death. And you had to treat, you can see there, I think it says 27 people over the age of 75 to prevent one of those outcomes. So this is a very powerful intervention. Next. This shows a question that when I started this study, I was thinking that, well, if you were very frail, you wouldn't have a lot of benefit. It might be more dangerous to have your blood pressure treated to lower. But this shows, in that same study, now all these people were walking, so they had to be able to walk into their doctor's office. These aren't people who live in a nursing home or live in an assisted living facility. These are older people, but who are frail on the right-hand side, in the intermediate stage, or very fit on the left-hand side. The left-hand side looks kind of funky, because fit older people, no matter how old they are, still had very few of these events. Frail people had a lot, but still, there was a 32%, you see that 0.68 number on the left, on the far right. That's a 32% reduction in heart attack, stroke, heart failure in people who are already frail. And just a small amount of change pushes them out of their home and into a nursing home. So, and the next slide, we weren't, even I, as a geriatrician, didn't believe that result. So we said, we measured the walking speed of everyone when they started the study. And here, you see people who had a slow gait speed. 0.8 meters per second is slow. Greater than 0.8 meters is good. Greater than 0.1 is the best. Greater than 1.0 meters per second. By the way, if you go through a crosswalk, the crosswalk is timed so that you can cross the street in 0.6 meters per second. So that's how long you have when that flash starts. The flash doesn't start. How long when the white says walk? Yeah, they're expecting you to be able to walk 0.6 meters per second. So here you see on the left, people who walk slow. We just asked them to do 4 meters with a stopwatch at 102 sites around the country. These are 9,000 people, but actually 3,000 people over the age of 75. And you can see that this is even very strongly preventive of those very events in people who are walking slow versus those people who are walking a more normal pace. Next slide. I'm going to skip this. Well, just to say this. There was also some question about, can we get people who are ambulatory, who are walking but frail, can we get their blood pressure down? And you can see in the middle row that people who were frail were still able to get their blood pressure with an average of 1 extra medication a day. True, this is there were 2 medications to get to 140, 3 to get to 120. Almost all people take 2 medications to have your blood pressure controlled to 140. On average, it takes another medication, which is way less than a cell phone bill every month. All the medications were generic in the trial. Anyway, the bottom line is that in that middle row, you can see the standard group all was at 135, and the intensive group, it was a little harder to get frail people down, but we still got them down to 124, and the lower blood pressure numbers were really no different within the group on the intensive or within the group on the standard. Next slide. Oh, I have a circle there just to tell me what to say. The next slide just shows you, this slide just shows you the particular categories of what the reduction was. And if you look at the HR column here, the 95% reduction, that just tells you, for example, heart attacks were reduced by 27%. That 0.73 is a 27% reduction in heart attack. Strokes, 25%. Death, 40%. And that's death from heart disease. Death from any cause was reduced by 32%. You can see down there in the next to the last category. Okay, so the next slide is something that's also a question, especially I had, many geriatricians had. If you lower people's blood pressure who are walking, do they fall more? Many of us thought they might, although there was evidence to show from the 1970s, 80s, and 90s that a better blood pressure control actually reduced a person's chance of falling. And here we see no difference. We didn't show a reduction, although they did fall slightly less, but it was not statistically significant. But there was no increased fall risk in this population of individuals. Now, we eliminated people whose blood pressure started below 135, and people who were already falling all over the place. I'll use a non-geriatrician term, but they were not in the trial. But people who were walking well and not falling, this is where we looked at. Even syncope, which is under the second row there, that's just when you get dizzy and you sort of pass out. There was no difference in the groups. Okay, next slide. There was one thing on that slide I do want to point out. Because there was this, one of the particular medications we use to lower blood pressure, a very mild diuretic called HCT0, actually it's chlorthalidone is the medicine we use. That does make people slightly at higher risk for getting dehydrated. So if an older person had some diarrhea or was out in the sun too long, they were more likely to become dehydrated if they were in that group. But compared to all the other things that could happen to you, everyone recovered from that dehydration. There was no difference obviously the death rate was way lower in the intensive group. So the question I always have to ask patients is, are you willing to risk a little bit of higher risk for dehydration versus death or a stroke? And almost all of them choose, well, I'll take my chance with the dehydration. Next slide. This just shows you how this research was put into new recommendations that were released last November at the American Heart Association meeting. And so this recommended now that all Americans, regardless of age, have a blood pressure treatment goal, a systolic blood pressure treatment goal of 130 or less. We didn't choose 120 because the measurements in the study were so carefully done. The best measurement for your blood pressure is you sit still for 5 minutes and you take the average of 3 readings. That's how a real blood pressure should be taken. Most of us, when you go into the office, you're rushing from the parking lot, having had trouble finding a parking place. They slap a blood pressure cuff on your shirt through your sleeve, take your blood pressure, and say the doctor will see you now. That's not really a good blood pressure. So you can measure your own blood pressure at home by just getting an automated blood pressure cuff and doing what I just told you. 5 minutes, sitting still, thinking peaceful thoughts. Okay, next slide. By the way, let's go back to that last slide. One last thing. On the bottom is a recommendation. It says if someone is frail or in a nursing home or falling, that we can adjust. Their blood pressure is not supposed to get that guideline. I think we're in the last slide. The next slide is this one here. What does the blood pressure group have to do with dementia? And this will be the first study in history to show that if your blood pressure was treated to 120 versus 140, you had a lower chance of developing dementia or mild cognitive impairment, which is an early form of dementia. Mild cognitive impairment patients have trouble playing games with their families, managing their finances, functioning in an increasingly technological world. They have a lot of difficulty functioning in that world. But they can generally, on a daily basis, function with their family and still drive, so just not drive in a highly congested area. So that's really important news. It doesn't prevent all dementia, but it lowered this by 20%. Okay, next slide. I think that's the last slide. So summary is what I've already told you. I won't go through that. I don't know how much time we have left. I left my cell phone in my jacket, but 2 minutes for questions. Yes.
Have you looked at like diet and exercise as a means of blood pressure control as
Yes.
opposed to medication?
So diet and exercise a person who loses a lot of weight, who loses 20 to 40 pounds, can lower their blood pressure by about 1 point every pound you lose. So they can really lose down. But for most people, diet and exercise will lower your blood pressure about 5 millimeters of mercury. So most people will need that plus a medication. Great, only one question.
What about for those of us that are not in any of those stages yet?
Yes. So this study actually enrolled people. So there were 9,300 and something, 336 people. 6,000 of the individuals were from age 50 to 75. We showed exactly the same result for them. I mainly just did this for older people today, but you know, and so for people whose blood pressure is 130 to 140, doing the diet and exercise is the way to go to start with. But if your blood pressure is 130 to 140, and you also have high cholesterol or have a family history of heart attack or stroke, family history of dementia, I think if it were me, I would go ahead and say, get me below 130. I want the best chance to prevent those things. Okay?